Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucia Gomez, and I am today's host of Critica NYC. We're being joined by your previous host, Raquel Batista, the current Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs for the City of New York. And we're going to have a conversation today de todo un poco, a little bit of everything. I think there's so many amazing things happening throughout the City of New York right before the end of the year. And it's never a dull moment coming the holidays in New York City with the lights and the music and the festivities, but definitely much more so because we have major pieces of legislation that like to creep in and pass before the start of a new year and of a new administration. We have a whole new mayor, a comptroller, a bunch of city council members, majority of which are going to be brand new. We'll have a new speaker of the city council. We actually are living in a moment where we actually also have a new governor. We have a candidates race for governor and all the state legislative and federal seats next year in 2022. And so there is no pause on the electoral excitement, but more so we're living through, the tail ends, hopefully, or in the midst of still a pandemic, and ensuring that our communities are making the right choices for their health, and at the same time ensuring that our communities have access to all the kinds of health and social services that they need in order to survive through what's been happening. So I want to make sure that we give it a moment to invite Raquel Batista to join us here today, because we know there's a lot of great things happening at the New York City Office of Immigrant Affairs, and I'm excited that she's with us once again. We had you at the start of July, right, when I took this on, and I'm really glad, almost 6 months into this, right? 5 months?
That's right. Thank you so much, Lucia, for inviting me to come on today. It has been almost 6 months that I've been in the position as Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs. There has not been one dull moment. As you know, there's so many exciting things happening all of the time. And, the Office of Immigrant Affairs really works towards responding to the issues that are impacting immigrant New Yorkers, both people who are undocumented, but also citizen immigrants that are impacted by a variety of issues. So, I'm just really happy to be here with you today and to talk about all of the work that we've been doing over the last several months.
So is it everything you imagined? Well, I know you worked a lot with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, right? I mean, in your different positions as executive director.
Well, it's interesting because when I was executive director of the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigrant Rights, that was at the beginning of the 2000s, right? And this office was a very small office and really was doing more, ceremonial work and, some like community affairs things, but not necessarily really taking such a deep look at policy and legislation that impacts immigrants as it does now. I think over the last several years, especially during the Trump administration, the former commissioners together with the mayor and the city council really worked towards protecting immigrant New Yorkers in many ways, from developing legislation that would hinder the ability of immigration and ICE to be able to pick someone up from the jails, to really strengthening and getting more funding to our CBOs that provide services to immigrant New Yorkers. And I think the huge thing that Moya has really done, especially during this pandemic, is look at creative ways to get resources to undocumented immigrants that otherwise would not get any help from government, because most services are for legal permanent residents or people who have a certain status, and it becomes very difficult for people who are undocumented. So Moya was critical in developing a COVID relief fund that was funded by the Open Society Fund that provided over $20 million to undocumented immigrant New Yorkers that were unable to access other resources. For example, even very recently, and something that I got to work on is when Hurricane Ida hit, we realized that undocumented immigrants would have difficulty in being able to access funding such as FEMA. And we came together with the state and we created a $27 million fund for undocumented immigrants impacted by Hurricane Ida. And we continue to work with several of our community-based partners who are helping to disperse the funds. And so, Moya has really just been there during all of what's been happening over the last 2 years.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned both two items that are emergencies, right? Like
yes.
Things that we do not expect. I mean, it's already horrendous that so many of our communities live within certain living conditions, certain, economic brackets, taking on, in many instances, our immigrant populations, the grunt of the low wage work that happens throughout the city of New York and throughout the state and basically throughout the country. But you talk about two emergencies in the last 2 years alone. And we've never been shy of tackling the emergencies and tackling, the attacks on our communities. And, there's the Latinx immigrant communities, and then there's, the broader foreign-born communities, whether you're, one of the diverse Asian populations, African populations, right? Indo-Caribbean populations. There's just so much in terms of the diversity. How does Moya manage all that?
Well, this goes to my point that Moya has really grown over the years, right? It was an agency that was at one time just 10 people, and it grew at its peak at having 70 staff members.
Wow.
And this includes people, our outreach team that goes out every single day, talks to community leaders. They do presentations on the variety of issues impacting immigrant New Yorkers, from know your rights on immigration to making sure that we have vaccination vans showing up in those vulnerable communities where we've had low rates of vaccinations, and making sure that New Yorkers are getting vaccinated. We have an incredible policy and legal team that they are the ones that analyze, the legislation that's coming out from the city, from the state, from the federal government, and how will it impact immigrant New Yorkers. And we also help to inform those processes. We work with our external affairs team from, getting the message out there, talking to community and ethnic media like the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, to be able to communicate the various programs that the city has, to educate our community, to get them the information that they need. And, the fact that, right, this has really been a priority for the mayor and for the leadership of New York City. I mean, this is really what makes New York City so great, is the fact that we truly invest in our immigrant communities. It is a priority, and they are part of the whole ecosystem of when it comes to all the issues that we work on.
I mean, I guess that we both come, right, through the last couple of decades from organizations and institutions that do great work within the community, whether grassroots organizations, direct service institutions, umbrella organizations that try to pool resources in order for these established, 501c3 nonprofit charitable organizations can do this work. But it seems to me like, government has also recognized the huge role that they play in ensuring that government-based services are not just subcontracted, resources that are provided to overly exasperated organizations in our neighborhoods, but that they're kind of putting robust infrastructure within government to address these things. That's a change. I mean,
that is something that has evolved over time, and I think something that is definitely a signature of the de Blasio administration, where it has things like a very robust community affairs unit. There's the public engagement unit that works also very closely with our CBOs and leadership and community boards and our elected officials. We have the Racial Justice Commission, right? That's looking at the charter from a racial justice lens, and how are the laws impacting communities of color and immigrant and women. There's just so many things that have happened over the last several years that, it really truly is incredible. All the changes from, for example, having pre-K, universal pre-K in New York City, that is a huge relief. I mean, I myself as a parent, to be able to have pre-K available, it really is a big deal, especially for working parents, right? And I think that, we are really looking towards, so much has been done, and there's so much more to do always, right? There's always something that happens, especially in a city like New York City. But really, there has been a real commitment to be there in the trenches, working on these issues.
It's so funny because within probably like 2 minutes, you've been able to tout more things to be happy about de Blasio having been in office in the last, couple of years than, I'll be honest, anyone I've ever heard say, or even I, who can think of things that he's made better. But you got to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, I think so.
You got to take the good with the horrible, and all the other things that are happening. So, props to you at being able to, like, at a minimum, tout the good stuff, because I know a lot of us see and have felt, some of the negatives and overwhelming.
Well, for me, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, born and raised and bred in the Bronx. And, I've seen our city go through so many different things, right? From surviving the late 70s and 80s in New York City, when there was a huge disinvestment in New York City, to then, going through 9/11, and then this pandemic, and it's just, there's so many things, right? And I think that from my perspective, government has really gotten better in a lot of ways in terms of responding to these issues, and really being there and looking at creative ways to work together with our partners throughout the city, whether it's foundations, the corporate sector, our community-based organizations, right? And, yes, granted, there are good things, there are bad things, but I think that, from what I've seen, a lot of really great things, especially in the immigrant rights space, the fact that, like, there's been this real investment. I think from my perspective, it's huge, and I really hope that to continue seeing this as we move forward into the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I know that when we did census, just last year, right? And the regardless of when it started or what, the fact that they took the time to invest in our neighborhoods, right? They took the time to think through the partners that needed to be at the table. A lot of immigrant communities that were at the table, nobody would have ever imagined that we would be conducting a census during a pandemic, during a shutdown, right? During a need for us to be away from each other, and to ensure that, while people were dying, right, in many of these neighborhoods that were already hard to enumerate. Definitely, I think that we can, immigrant communities and communities of color across the city came out in great numbers to ensure that all communities negatively impacted during the pandemic, and those communities already hard to enumerate during the census. And that definitely I saw it first time that I had seen that kind of a robust operation to meet people where they were, versus saying, well, we put out the information, here are the posters, right? I remember when we had a lot of posters, a lot of buttons and a lot of trinkets and flyers that don't necessarily mean people take action. So I'm always very critical, of taking a look at the full picture. And definitely census is definitely an example for me, that as I saw and I lived in the last three cycles of this, can say it was the first time New York took it to the next level. And that was great to see. I know that the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs recently conducted a report. Do you want to tell us a little bit about,
Sure, I would love to. So we just put together a demographic snapshot of the Latinx immigrant population in New York City. We've been doing this, been a series that we've been doing on several communities. The first one was on the Asian American community, the AAPI community. And this is our second one on the Latinx immigrant population. And some things, just to highlight from this report, right? First, the Latinx population has grown since 2010 by 7%. We've seen that the Latinx immigrant community is a very diverse community of over 20 nations. And Dominicans make up the largest Latinx immigrant group at 41% in New York City. And actually, we see that the majority of the Latinx immigrants reside in Queens at 33% and in the Bronx at 30%. And so, for me, that's actually a very important and notable thing for us to look at, in terms of, how the city is looking at investments in the immigrant communities and putting energy and efforts in. So, here we have highlighted the borough of Queens, where it shows, right, 33% is Latinx immigrants. And then you see the breakdown of the top three largest communities in Queens of Latinx immigrants, which are Ecuadorians, Dominicans, and Mexicans. Also, we have the Bronx, right? So we just talked about the Bronx at 30%. You have the largest Latinx immigrant community is the Dominican community at 64%. And I think, we see this, right, in terms of, our last round of elections. We saw a lot of young Dominican folks getting elected to the city council. We have 14% Mexican and 6% Ecuadorian. So those are the largest Latinx immigrants in the Bronx. And then in Brooklyn, right, I'm always surprised with Brooklyn, right? And I know others would laugh at me, but with 13% of all Dominican immigrants live in Brooklyn. So, actually recently this past Saturday, we at Moya, we just had our first in-person large citizenship drive with Citizenship Now, CUNY. And we did it together with several other co-sponsors. We're going to be having a second one that's coming up here in the Bronx. And here's because I live here in the Bronx. It'll be on December 18th at Ostos. And we can talk a little bit more about that after we talk a little bit more about the report. And then, I just also want to make sure that I highlight, what the foreign born, I think we have that graph up as well about who's the foreign born in New York City, right? So we have here, 31% of the foreign born is Latinx, while 19% are Black, 28% are AAPI, 19% white. And then of undocumented immigrants, 53% are Latinx, Hispanic, and of that 24% is Asian American, Pacific Islander, 12% Black, and 9% white. So, immigrants, again, are very diverse, varied population coming from all over the world, of all races, speaking a variety of languages. This graph here compares the Latinx foreign-born groups of New York City compared to the United States, right? So, for example, something to know, right? In the United States, Dominicans are almost 6% of Latinx foreign-born, but in New York, we are 40%, right? And so we already know that the largest diaspora of the Dominican community lives in New York City, and they live in the Bronx. And so we've definitely been seeing those moves. And it's something that I also think about, not only because I am of Dominican descent, but also, how are we really, building with our immigrant communities in the Bronx? And it's something, I do think about often. Our Queens community is super, super active. They have so much work to do. They've really been hardest hit by the pandemic and by Hurricane Ida, and we continue to really work very closely with our partners in Queens to make sure that they're getting the resources needed. And then here we have our total population. These are just the changes, right, over the years amongst the different undocumented, immigrant communities of Latino heritage. And so this is also something of note to look at. This report really is in depth. It looks at everything from our economic characteristics, our poverty rate, our age, who's owning a home, who's renting, and so we really develop these to really help inform people in government, in the nonprofit space, people who are looking to develop policies, who are working on a variety of issues to really help inform them more about the Latinx immigrant community in New York City.
Wow. I know that I just going and skimming through the entire report, so many things stand out. We've had a couple of shows, as you can imagine, around the census, around the numbers, around what it means, when public policy issues get brought up, right? And the ways in which it impacts neighborhoods and communities, and who's the community that's going to be mostly bearing the brunt of a negative impact, or who's going to be the one who's going to be elevated as a result of a positive impact that it's going to have. These reports help us kind of navigate through those waters, like who's going to be positively impacted, who's going to be negatively impacted. What kind of changes will come to the Bronx that will be necessary, and who is it impacting, and who do you engage, right? Makes no sense from this report to engage the two Colombians living in Throgsnick, just as an example, nothing again, for the Bronx versus, the large segment of a Dominican population overall, both foreign-born and native-born, because one of the fascinating pieces of the report talks about the fact that even though, the Latino community has grown and did grow in 7% throughout the decade, right? The reality is that it grew not because of the foreign-born population, so ojo, right? Because that's a big deal, versus the native-born. And that could tell a little, we can see that a little bit in the youth, right? In the low under the 18 population numbers, and why those numbers are so different and so much larger in the Latinx community. But, that means the future is Latino.
The future is Latinx immigrants. It's immigrant overall, but definitely Latinx immigrants are a huge piece of that. And I also, being a second generation Latina, right? My mom arrived here in 1962. My grandmother arrived in 1960. I'm the first American born in my family. And even while growing up and while I was in college, Latinos have always been a younger demographic, right? And so a lot of the issues that impact us that we end up talking about a lot are issues like education, like access to, good paying jobs, like, healthcare for young people. Those are things that are really important. After school, daycare, childcare. Those are all of the issues that really impact young people. And, we continue being a very young community. I mean, I think it's also interesting, for me, just even also watching, right, younger folks, they're a whole different breed, right? And their interests are varied, and they're going into the workforce differently. And so, I find it interesting, the conversations in that space, right, is something that really needs to continue and needs to deepen in order for us, I think, as a city, right, and we're looking towards the future, that we're really engaging with our young people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm such a, what's stuck in my head is that when I say native born, I'm thinking once those people hit 18, they'll be eligible to vote.
Yes, that's right.
And while, the mindset in many folks, because of whether it's language access, the fact that we have mixed neighborhoods, right? And we have mixed households where there could be one person who's permanent resident, one person naturalized citizen, another person, born a citizen, and maybe their cousin or their mom or someone who overstayed a visa, right? Or came here undocumented, or the daughter that crossed the border because of fear and retaliation in their country of origin. Like, we're mixed households.
Yeah, and actually our report discusses that. Latinx individuals in New York City are more likely to live in a mixed household at 20%, which is a big number, right? That means that you have everyone from a citizen to a legal permanent resident to an undocumented person living all in one household. And also, right, we have multiple households in one apartment or in one home. We're not just like one nuclear family. We also have multiple generations and other families all living under one household, which is something that really does impact our policies and how we implement, our programs within our communities. And that's where, Moya becomes an important piece, right? Because we are able to talk to that and articulate that and make sure that our sister agencies and the folks that we work with, whether in the state and the federal government, really understand those issues.
And I just, that means that our young people are growing up in really rich, meaning culturally rich, very, I mean, not to say that we didn't have that, because my parents also, Cuba, Mexico, right? Naturalized citizens, raising a family of 6 and then in a crazy environment. I mean, they're growing up with, we're talking more, and they're being exposed to more things like the need for immigration reform, like the era of DACA, like the era of ensuring that, parents get some kind of relief and efforts, COVID, yes. Right? We have this generation of young people that have seen a lot.
Well, I say there's this show, I don't know if you watched it, Gentefied on Netflix. Nice. That show really talks to that, where the dad is, he was a small business owner. Now he finds himself being deported. His children are all US born. They're all fighting for the dad to keep him home. It talks about all of those things that you just said, which is really incredible to watch it on screen, being able to really articulate the complexity of our lives. And I think that, That's one of the things that's always so hard, right? Especially when we're talking about issues of immigration reform and, people kind of really wanting to simplify it in a way that it's just like, that's not really how life works for most immigrants in this country.
And let me just say, for those households that are watching, right, you're in mixed households, you're in great company, right, with other households. At the same time, I'm going to say the power is going to be in our young people's hands. So let's just make sure that we're mentoring them, that we're providing and affording them opportunities to meet new people, to listen to new issues, to be able to develop their leadership, because programs exist, and let's make sure that we try to have these programs reach our young people, especially our young people that están siendo concientizados, right? They're developing a consciousness of activism, a consciousness of needing to be engaged and helping fight, whether it's for their parents, but there's, their parents are an example of so many other New Yorkers that are going through similar issues. I know, Raquel, that, for everyone who has, an opportunity to get this report online, take a look at it. Take a, fast, glance at it. And then, I'm all for, knowing more about, the city and knowing why certain things happen in certain neighborhoods and certain boroughs. And, everything is by design. I think we learned that. We've been having conversations about Robert Moses' book, right? When Buttigieg, Secretary Buttigieg, raised the fact that, the Bronx was developed in such a way to hinder opportunity and to hinder communities being able to, have good prosperity, good health, economic development. The reality is that nothing is done de coincidencia, right? People plan out these things and then, have as victims in the end a set of people that perhaps weren't their priority in a given moment. And we're living in a moment in time where, I think so many crossroads are hitting, right?
Yeah, I think we are in a very interesting moment right now, and which is why also I'm very excited to be a part of government right now, because we're still going through the pandemic. New York City has done a great job in terms of getting vaccinated, and now our kids are getting vaccinated. My daughter just got her first shot a week and a half ago when they came to her school with the vaccines. And so, now as we continue with the recovery for New York City, and we're now having new leadership coming in, everyone from the mayor, the comptroller, all of that you just mentioned, I think that this is going to be really interesting in terms of, what are we going to be seeing in terms of new policies, new priorities, how are we, we're going to assure that, we continue providing the services that we need to provide in immigrant communities, discussing issues like Mayor-elect has discussed around, language access and others. And so I think it's a really exciting time right now.
What are the most, if you can pick two things that, you'd be happy to take on in 2022 because you think they need to take center stage for whatever reason, and you're more than welcome to elaborate. What do you think those two things are?
Well, I still remain hopeful. I remain hopeful to see some form of immigration reform. And so if we get Build Back Better, I think we're going to have a huge opportunity to do a lot of work to assure that it gets implemented the right way, and that, our communities always suffer from issues like notario fraud and, high payments for immigration legal services. And so I really want to be able to take a look at how can we really build up, right, to make sure that our agencies and our CBOs are able to respond, but also the private bar, right? Also immigration attorneys who are doing this work. How can we as government work with them to assure that immigrants are really getting the best services possible.
Now,
right?
I don't want to gloss over Build Back Better, right?
Yes.
Like, you threw it out there.
Yes.
Not sure if a lot of people know. Maybe they do. Maybe they've been watching, paying attention to DC politics. But what's happening? I mean, what would Build Back Better do? Because I've seen different proposals for immigrant communities. We're talking about, and I don't want to speak out of turn, so please feel free, because some provisions not too many people are happy with, but
Yes. Some provisions, the community has been working on, and so has the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, together with a coalition that we have called Cities for Action, where we work with mayors and county executives throughout the country to really advocate for a pathway to citizenship. And we have all been working towards creating a pathway to citizenship for people who have TPS, DACA recipients, our essential workers, really looking to create a level of permanency, right? But right now, what we've seen in Build Back Better and in the provisions that are in right now is basically to get parole, right? It's basically like saying to people, if you've been here undocumented, you're going to be able to say that you've been here. You're going to be able to get a work authorization. You're going to be able to work in the country. You'll have the ability to travel. And there's other certain things, right? But the challenge is that this does not necessarily guarantee you that you're going to get a green card or get onto the path to citizenship. And so, we find ourselves, at this moment, and I think that, we want to see something happen, something move, so that, we can create a situation where people are no longer living in the shadows. And so, right, we're waiting to see what the Senate will do once they come back to vote on Build Back Better. We'll see what the parliamentarian does there as well. When it comes to the immigration provisions.
Wait, the parliamentarian is our vice president?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see what happens.
The one that told all our folks to stay home, don't come to the US. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot, right?
There's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake.
But the reality is that, there's a huge push from our communities, right? And our coalitions and our advocacy groups that, never shy,
Yes.
never stop fighting till the very end to try to get the maximum amount of relief, because there are people who have been living here for a very long time.
Decades, yes.
Contributing ever so to the economy, to the engagement, to the society in so many different levels. And even now, during the pandemic, we saw the rise of many of our, immigrant communities rise to become, and have always been our essential workers, but they kind of took center stage. I think we've seen, some examples of this, of the deliveristas that,
yes.
That's the term now, and the organization that has become the deliveristas. But as an example of how resilient communities are when they're put in a corner, right? Don't have relief efforts from other places, have to still survive in this great city. And so they create new mechanisms for being able to work within the, the US economy. And so really, hands down, the most sophisticated level of marketing and campaign the deliveristas have gone out there delivering folks food in the middle of
yes.
Hurricane Ida. We saw some of those, press items, but definitely not going to be a dull 2022, right?
No, it's not. It's never. No, it's not going to be at all.
So absolutely, you spoke of relief. Is there any other, measure that you think, at least immediately at the start of the year has to be a top priority for the city?
Well, I think, on some levels, there's some things that we need from the state, right? So, we're waiting to see on what's going to happen with rental assistance as the time tolls on, people being able to pay, not pay, going to court, having to, deal with their whole housing situation. So, I think, there's that. But I think in terms of the city, right, it's going to be, continuing the work. Like, for example, with our vaccination campaigns, while we have high rates, we still have areas of the city that have had lower rates than others. And, we've been doing very targeted outreach in those areas of the city, like in Brooklyn and Far Rockaway and in areas like that. And then I think the other big one will be, as we're looking at, education and education issues, how our students are faring right now being back since the lockdowns, and really looking at ways on how we can deepen our work within immigrant communities in our public schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think be interesting to see if there's any kind of report, that will be able to highlight, again, I'm big on learning and seeing the numbers, but anything that will be able to highlight the impact that COVID, that specific time when our children were literally out of school for, a year, what impact it had on our young people and what kind of additional resources need to be put in place in order for them to catch up at grade level, right? So, that's something for us to take a critical look at. I'm looking immediately and I think of, the Racial Justice Commission that exists, right? The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the Democracy Office, right? A lot to discuss if and when immigrants gain the right to vote, at the municipal level, because I know that, that's hot to trot, in the last couple of weeks of the agenda. If and when, I know you talked about notary fraud, and I know you talked about some of the other things that really are like commercial opportunities that negatively impact when people, take advantage of immigrant communities, right? Yeah. Consumer affairs issues. Don't you think that, if these folks don't have a clear path to citizenship, and you have work authorization, it's sort of like stringing them along a little for, because Build Back Better talks about 10 years.
I think, so like, if anything, if history teaches us, right, one of these sort of like worker programs, right, because this is essentially like a worker program. It's a transitional program where, like the Bracero program, like you get brought in, you work, and then it's like, we're going to send you back. I'm not saying that necessarily this program, right, is going to mean, we're going to, after the 10 years, there's going to be like this massive deportation program. But it does still kind of leaves us in the same place where whether it's in 5 years, in 10 years, we're still going to have to deal with the question of getting some level of permanency to this community, because, right, the reality is that communities are not transitional. People come here and they come to stay, and they make the United States their home. They make New York City their home. And so I think, especially from all the lessons learned, throughout this whole pandemic, in terms of being able to address the varied issues of undocumented communities, it really highlights, I think, for me, and especially, for a lot of New Yorkers, the need for us to, be able to grant people a real pathway to citizenship.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know there's going to be a lot at stake, not just with the 2022 congressional races, right? I mean, this is going to be part, if we're not able to achieve the Build Back Better, we just passed the infrastructure bill. Yeah. Right. Congress and the Senate passed it. The president signed it. Huge win for especially places like New York and New York City. Yep. This means opportunities for work. At a minimum, those of our workers in the city that were plagued with a lack of, especially within sectors of construction and economic development, yes, and cleaning and some of our
highways, all of that. Yes,
that's right. So I am going to put a quick plug so that folks that there's going to be a lot of opportunities within apprenticeship programs. right? Within labor unions that focus on and concentrate on, and have different levels of work, whether it's carpenters or laborers, plumbers and sheet metal workers and bricklayers, right? Like if, it's a little bit of the demystification of the fact that, diverse communities can access the union construction arenas and the different areas of the labor movement. I highly encourage you to reach out to the Department of Labor. They have a list of all the apprenticeship programs. I'm sure we're going to see huge opportunities of opening up in some sectors of the movement, of the labor movement, of different unions, because they're going to need the workers. Right. I mean, yeah. And our immigrant communities should know. And I think that's a good segue for you, Raquel, in terms of the work, the public sector work.
Sure. No, and I think that this is also going to be a big issue in the coming years, right? As the workforce is also changing in the city and a lot of people are retiring or leaving the workforce. And there's been a lot of predictions right around, all the new positions that are going to be coming up. So, I definitely want to, let people know that if people are interested in working in New York City government, there are civil service jobs and tests that one needs to take in order to be able to qualify and to apply for several of these jobs. And, people can absolutely go and check out the website. It is, it's New York City DCAS, which is the Citywide Administrative Services. And when you go to the website, you can check out what tests are going to be up and coming. There's several coming up over the next month into December. So, for example, right now, there's a title exam for emergency medical specialists and industrial hygienists and school safety agents, right? So we're looking for people to help with school safety and traffic enforcement agents. So there's, a lot of different opportunities coming up over the next several months and I think over the years, which is also really interesting in terms of when we start looking at immigrant communities, right? And people who could potentially become eligible and creating the pipeline so that people are ready to take these tests and get these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in order for all of New York City to be able to climb out of, the desperation in so many ways of homelessness and food insecurity. And, they were talking about there being a shortage of turkeys. And there was this whole, news piece. And I was like, well, there's a lot of turkeys being given away in some of our neighborhoods. I saw the amazing work of so many of our different electeds in these neighborhoods, with lines and handing out bags of food. And, I was inspired by that, honestly, because there was a lot of volunteers and both government and non-government community-based organizations, giving. And we have so much to be grateful for in this week in particular that we'll be having an opportunity to share some time, hopefully safely with family and friends. Let's not forget that there's tons of people that still don't have food in the city of New York, still don't have jobs, not just because the common trend out there is that they don't want to work. That is not the case. The folks don't want to work for really, really dirt wages, right? And so really great that we get this, information about folks, applying for citywide, for city type jobs, that we're going to see a lot of people who retired, right? Who retired amidst the pandemic, amidst, not wanting to come back to the hustle and bustle of New York City, whatever reasons there will be hopefully money being pumped in through the infrastructure bill that just passed, and so many more opportunities. And we're able to get work authorization for folks. I'm just saying you should definitely look to some of these sectors, unionized sectors in particular, that have really through the decades and through the centuries provided our communities a path, to the middle class and getting out of this. Because the reality is that the rules change once the demographics of the population searching for the work is out there. So, let's all just kind of make sure we share the information and pass that information along. Raquel, I know that you were going to mention a new program, or did you mention already in terms of citizenship? Were you talking about that?
Yeah, so we just this past weekend, like I mentioned earlier, we had our first in-person major citizenship drive with CUNY Citizenship Now. We had it in Brooklyn. It was a wonderful success. Over 100 people showed up to be able to apply for citizenship or to find out what they're eligible for and to get that assistance. We're working with 8 groups throughout the city, including Dominicanos USA, the Arab American Association, the Mexican Coalition, and several other institutions to make sure that we really reach out to our most vulnerable New Yorkers. And, we really want to let people know, right, because so much happened, right, over the last several years around, who could apply, public charge, fee waivers, all of those things. And so right now we're in a great position where people are able to apply for their fee waivers. Right now, citizenship application costs $725, which is a pretty penny. But we really want to work with people to see if, they qualify for a fee waiver and they can get their citizenship application done for free and be able to apply at no cost. And so our next one is coming up on December 18th, and it will be at Ostos. So we're really excited about that.
Well, when I hear, first of all, the fact that you did your first one in Brooklyn, and I know that the Latino population is 8% in Brooklyn, that you probably covered much more than just Latinos.
Yes.
Within that, and that's pretty amazing work, right? And then you go out into the Bronx, and I think, well, my head calculates 54% of the borough is Latino, and then on top of that, what did we say, about 60% of that 54% is Dominican. In terms of the foreign-born population, it definitely, I want to encourage everyone. I don't know. I always think of the fact that elections are next year, and there's still time in order to register to vote for the June primary, right? And then the general elections. But we're going to go up on a battle in 2024 during the presidential elections. And
so and then just a few things to highlight, right? So in New York City, we have almost 500,000 people that are legal permanent residents that are eligible for citizenship that can be applying.
People is just like a drop in a bucket, right?
Exactly. So there's a lot of work for us to do in order to really get people to become citizens, right? And then on top of that, we just really want to make sure that people are also civically engaged, right? That people are, aware about what services are out there, that, they are able to participate, like things like the census, whether it's your local community board or, another committee or your
community
PTA.
Education councils, right?
All of that. Yes. So, that's all a part of the work that we're doing.
And, what are some of the, look, the reality is that we have over 500,000 people potentially eligible to apply for citizenship. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
That's
and so
almost a congressional seat, if you tell me this.
And I give the story, like, for example, with my mother, right? There's my daughter, Carmen just got home from school. All right, mommy, let me finish. So, I give her story, right? My mother came at 12, right? I talk about that all the time, but she didn't become a U.S. citizen until she was like well into her 60s. And it was really at my behest. It was because I was bugging her and I'm like, you have to do it. Let's get this done, right? And so, for the young people out there, right, help your older folks, help your parents, your grandparents to make that move and to become a citizen. There's so many reasons that people don't want to do it, whether it's because of the economics, whether it's because of time, whether it's because, they think they're going to return back to their country, whatever that is, The reality is if you're here, you're a legal permanent resident, you've been here for 5 years, you're eligible. You've been married to a U.S. citizen for 3 years and you've been here, you're eligible. And it really does open the door to so much more in the city and in the country.
Now, we did have Dominicanos USA on the show earlier. I think it was about September at the start of Hispanic Heritage Month. And the great work that some of our organizations are really doing in this space to engage civically, not just politically, not just electorally, right, on election day or a couple of weeks before. But the fact that, it's using that voice, using that, and I would say that privilege or that right that you have and exercising that to help make changes, really does, it makes a difference. I mean, we just saw, so many elections across the city by a couple of votes, only by a couple of votes, winning. So, you could very well be
yes.
a couple of votes making a change, even in some, greater elections down the pipeline. I want to encourage folks to volunteer. Raquel, do you guys take volunteers and people who want to pay it forward for some of your programs or can refer them to programs?
So if people are interested, you can call the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs at 212-788-7654. You can also email us at askmoya@cityhall.nyc.gov. If you have questions about access to services or you're looking to volunteer, we do engage with volunteers and we do look for volunteers. So if you want to come out for the citizenship drive, please give us a call, send us an email, and we'll connect you to the right people.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Thank you so much, Raquel, for joining us. I know that it's never a dull moment. I'm looking forward to so many other amazing things that you will do. Hopefully, you will continue to do some amazing things over at Moya in the months and years ahead. So thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to the next time we can bring you on. All right, have a good one.
Bye.